Welcome, everyone. I'm glad that you took some time out of your day to join John and I for a conversation on friction, dissonance, waste, inefficiencies in software development. I'm Laura Tacho. I'm the CTO at DX, and I'm joined here by John. I'll let John introduce himself.
Yep, John, Senior Director of Product Enablement at Toast. Yeah, back to you.
Great. Keep it short and sweet. A few just like tiny little housekeeping things. Of course, the chat is going to be hopefully very active, and feel free to drop any thoughts and engage with each other in the chat. We really love to see it. If you have a question, you can use Zoom's Q&A feature. I'm going to have that open, and we'll kind of be popping into the questions and taking ones kind of throughout the time. There is, just forewarning, for those of you, there is a bit of an interactive part of this workshop in 10-15 minutes. So just be prepared for that. So without further ado, maybe one thing. I'm going to pose another question to the group. You can drop it in chat. John and I would love to know what you hope that we're going to address in the next 45 minutes. So what is it about friction, dissonance, waste that made you want to spend 45 minutes talking with us about it? We'd love to hear that, and just drop your thoughts in the chat or ask a question. We want to make sure this
Mars
is a
bar.
good...
Yeah, black pudding, and that's probably not about what we wanted to talk about, but you get the idea.
Yeah, funnel cake, but also how do I have this conversation with my engineering managers?
Yeah, about black pudding. Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. How you
Cool.
think about it, make it actionable. Nice. Okay. Awesome. Yeah, keep those coming, and we'll scan these. Very interesting.
These are great. Oh yeah. Ooh, roadmap level, some product level stuff, roadmap engineering level. Cool. John, do you want to tell the story of how we came to this topic and why we're sitting here together talking about this?
Sure. So I think it was a couple weeks before Christmas. And as is my way, at least, I get some idea. And of course, like everyone here, I completely, vastly underestimate how hard it's going to be. I did this with a book once, and the same thing happened. And so I thought to myself, why don't we put together a deck of cards to help teams have conversations, or better conversations about waste? And I thought what was interesting, and then I'll throw it over to Laura to get her side of it, was that I think it was over a weekend, sort of, I generated this list of, 150 odd items, and I took my certain approach to it. Laura put her list together. And I think we quickly realized, well, the cards were not going to happen before the holidays or anytime soon, right? Like, we realized that very quickly. But we also started to realize how even our perspectives as part of that activity were not vastly different. There were commonalities, but we took this whole spectrum of approaches to trying to solve this problem. And that in itself kind of clued us into opportunities maybe for teams. So we didn't get the deck done, and we're still working on it. And perhaps our activities today will be an input into that. But I thought more interesting was just that part of the process helped kind of clue us into maybe a broader opportunity. Yeah, curious, Laura, like how you thought about it.
Yeah, I think you've summed it up really well. For those of you who are listening in now, you might be familiar with the lean wastes, the 8 wastes of lean. I'll just read them out for those of you who aren't familiar with them. There's defects, overproduction, waiting, unused talent, transportation, inventory, motion, extra processing. And when John when we got connected about this waste thing, I think there's a lot of conversation about waste and theory of constraints. And what it all kind of comes down to is treating software development like an assembly line. And I think there's some like fundamental discrepancies with that model versus the way that software actually gets made, right? Maybe that's a whole different conversation about that. But I think what we both found was that there just wasn't a sufficient model to explain what we saw, and more importantly, what we felt And then what we needed to do with teams in order to address inefficiencies, and we might call them waste, we might just call them inefficiencies or something else. So yeah, what we thought was going to be, oh, well, let's just kind of list out the ways that teams are working inefficiently and like pick out the 25 most important ones, and then we can make a cute card deck and like call it a day. We kind of were examining like fundamentally, do we need to come up with a different worldview or system of organization for describing how teams are inefficient and where inefficiencies pop up.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, yeah. So I was going to just add to that quickly, like to give you like a very tangible example of what we're talking about. You know, I would maybe offer like this very theoretical version of waste. You know, I'd say reduce decision quality, which leads to ultimately impacted customer outcomes. It's very theoretical. You know, decision quality or decision velocity will eventually lead to maybe overproduction or anything. And Laura would weigh in with something that was completely cringeworthy that had a lot of value too. You know, it's like, what does it feel like to sit in a one-on-one and somehow the 30 minutes just blazes by and you haven't gotten anything out of the meeting. They haven't gotten anything out of the meeting. And you just feel it to your bones. Like that wasn't what it was. And sort of everywhere in between, right? Like things that were just a minor shrug, things that felt tormenting, or very concrete and tangible things and theoretical things, or things that were easier to action. Like, oh, I could just go to work and fix that tomorrow if I wanted to. And then things that were like hugely culturally embedded in the company, which just felt like you couldn't even wrap your head around. So just for some examples, you know, of like the ranges that we had when we did it, those were the things that came up.
yeah, yeah. And so kind of going off of that lean waste thing, there are some existing methodologies in which we understand waste, or we can map the ways that we see inefficiencies. You can probably look at your team, look at the 8 lean wastes, and then map everything that's happening on your team to one of those. Of course, that assumes that we're taking this very like manufacturing approach to software development, which, you know, a different conversation for a different time of whether that's appropriate or correct even. And so we have these like well-structured, well-defined wastes on one side. And then, as John said, like the cringe, like you can just say in chat if this has ever happened to you, but you have a day where you're at work and you've got like 15 minutes to get stuff done on the tail ends of the meetings that you have to run into. And I think like John, we talked about this in the prep call for this, but like in that model, it's easy for us to point to and say, well, the meetings are a waste of time because they're pulling me out of deep work. And I think your point, John, was like, if then the conversation it was a waste of time, there's probably things that are even bigger wastes of time than that meeting. But the reason that we are all so drawn to meetings and saying, oh, meetings are the enemy here is because like it really affects us on a personal level. Like it just feels icky.
Yep.
Just feels icky.
One thing that I've noticed too is the degree to which we become sort of desensitized in our current environment, or there's this level of, I think the word is acculturation, right? Where it's this, we just become wrapped up in the culture of our company. So if anyone maybe in the chat can think of this example, you know, you notice that a new employee in your company is in their first 2 weeks of working there, and they sort of wade into Slack and say, hey, does anyone do like CI/CD here? You know, and then no one answers. And it's like, did anyone tell them? Like, did anyone break the news about how we're working? You know, this is an example. And what you notice is that person doesn't keep doing that. And if they do, they might leave, right? But often they don't keep doing that after the second or fourth week. So I think that's another thing that we noticed in our conversations that's sort of actionable for you to think about in this, is the degree to which you have this window of opportunity to understand some of these emotions and feelings and sort of feelings of dissonance that people have when they join the company. And then often all of us, that's one thing that fascinates me. It's one thing for someone who's never worked in the way you're talking about to not understand how efficient or effective it is. It's another thing altogether for the people who join who do have some prior experience working in that way. And they feel it on a deep level initially when they join. And then, 2 weeks or 4 weeks or 2 months or 2 quarters later, somehow those folks have kind of pragmatically adjusted their approach, and they're not necessarily feeling it on that deep level again. So that's one other thing that jumped out about our conversation to me.
Yeah. I want to just take a little bit of time for this comment from David Larrabee. Hey, I know David. Is some waste necessary in innovation work? Because I think actually, John, I think this is such a good challenging question for us because we have predicated our entire discussion on eliminating waste. And I think this is actually the first time that this is pushing us to think, is some waste necessary? So what do you think about that?
Oh, absolutely. And I actually think that it's an example is some people ask questions about requirements quality in surveys. And what do you do if you prematurely converge to get perfect requirements quality before you start something? Well, you tend not to incorporate disconfirming information. And then 6 months later, you're shipping the exact thing that you said that you would ship, and everyone's happy and everyone's quote unquote productive. But you haven't necessarily. And so I think that this is an important component. I love that you brought this up, is in our conversations and back and forth, it became very clear that there's many different interpretations of waste. My feeling too is that waste has such a connotation from that lean background, and it evokes these ideas of like, that's wasteful, or I wasted my time. And in the traditional lean sense, waste was maybe like inventory sitting out in the yard. There was a fair amount of waste around the human element of it as well, obviously. But I think that the conversations about what is wasteful or not are probably way more important than saying that you're going to remove waste from your environment. So how about your thoughts?
I think that is a perfect summary. Absolutely. And actually, I think that's a great segue into the activity that John and I have prepared for all of you. So we thought that the best way to spend this 45 minutes is not just listening to the two of us talk about different ways that teams waste time. I mean, we're happy to do that. But what we'd really love to do is equip you all with a better way to talk about waste or identify waste and connect how you're feeling when you have those moments of like, oh my God, I can't believe that I have another meeting and I only get 5 minutes to do this thing. This feels like really counterproductive. Connect that so that you can have a more productive conversation about it. And when I say productive, because that's also a word that doesn't have a lot of clear definition, is like a conversation that can lead to change. So the way that we're going to do that is, first of all, we have a short Google form for you to fill out. I'm going to put it in the chat right now. So head there. It should take you, we're going to put 5 minutes on the clock. I'm going to be timekeeper here. So take 5 minutes. I want you to think about a time, could be last week, could be today even, where you're like, wow, this is a waste of time, or like we're doing something really inefficiently, and just write about that experience. Then we're going to take all of your answers, and John and I are going to go through some templates that John has prepared of like how to actually structure this into a change driving conversation.
Big thanks to the DX team, because we're not going to be sorting and organizing these. So there's a whole team of people who's going to take what you put in here and help organize it as we're doing it. Yeah. And for the second question around feeling, really tap into how did it feel? Try to remove your interpretation or your narrative around why it was that way or what it is, but really dig into just how it felt. I felt this way. And that's a really good prompt for that second question.
Great. I'm going to see if I can, I'll do a little trick here. If you're in listening mode or like in your car, we totally get it.
Yeah.
Don't worry. Don't worry about it. Instead of having like an egg timer, we'll just throw on a song that's the right amount of time. Can you hear that? John, can you hear that?
Yeah, I can hear it.
All right.
So I'm assuming they can hear it.
I hope so. Cool. Maybe while people are filling out about their experiences with this nice, gentle background music. Let's take, there's one question that we got. How can we help folks understand that without clear organizational and product vision, strategy, we do create unnecessary waste in the system, and it severely hinders our chances of success.
I'll
It's
take
a
a
big
quick stab.
question.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the way I try to explain that simply is around decision quality and decision velocity. I've had the most luck with explaining to someone that an engineer makes a cost-benefit decision every 15 minutes. And if you can just, strategy and all, there's a bunch of mushy words about vision, strategy, and all those things. And I think ultimately what they're doing is giving people context to make decisions. Although that's pretty academic, I would say it doesn't tap into the feeling side that we spoke about. I think that's how I've had best luck of explaining how those things can accelerate outcomes. But curious your thoughts, Laura. I'm taking one stance on that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I agree with that. I think I'm going to answer the question maybe in a different way that might not actually be the way that Ryan intended for it to be answered. But I think there's something to be said for like understanding your locus of control. And I absolutely agree that organizationally, the organization needs to support change and be willing to have change. I think there's also the other side of it, which is like we can't get change by like advocacy alone and by sweeping like initiatives at the executive level that say like, oh, we're now going to do this initiative or this initiative without actually taking it really far down into the individual. And so when I think about these things, I really think about the whole entire organization from like the organizational level, but also like within your teams, where are the opportunities? Where are the opportunities? I think though, fundamentally, Ryan, your question sounds like a very frustrating cultural divide. And that's where I see that question coming from.
Nice.
Great. John has a good answer. Some links.
Yep.
Well, let's see what else.
He's kind of joking about the articles. Yeah, but I do think about this stuff a bit. I love the questions about waste too. I'm beginning to think that I'm beginning to think more and more about the words we use and how they just spark this immediately maybe negative reaction and positive reaction in some sense. And like, for example, I recently wrote this post called Developer Counterproductivity. Like just focus on counterproductivity. And one thing I noticed was that the people doing work loved that post. Other people, not so much. So like I could have, if I was writing that post for someone different, I might have not phrased it developer counterproductivity.
Yeah, I think there's one thing, John, that you said in one of our conversations about this, where you really changed the way that I thought about waste and inefficiencies, which I think we had this kind of conversation about agency and what agency is. And I think at some point in that conversation, I mentioned like learned helplessness of like, I think it's like the example of the new hire. The new hire comes in and they have all these observations and they're very willing to share. And then like at some point we all become like acclimated or indoctrinated or whatever, however you want to like where you are on the scale of like pessimist to optimist, what that is. And we no longer help, or we see a problem and we think, I can't do anything about that problem. And I had, sometimes I used the term like learned helplessness to describe that feeling of like, I'm not going to take initiative to change it, or I'm not even going to imagine the ways that I could change it. And John, you called out that like learned helplessness is really like learn to help lessness.
Yeah.
And like since that, it just really like, I don't know, really stuck with me. And I've removed that from my vocabulary because I think it's not learned helplessness. It's like I've learned to help less, because every opportunity that I had to help or address a waste or an inefficiency, when it's not met with change, I just don't have any motivation or incentive to keep offering my opinion or my effort. I'll go do something else.
Yep. Is this next song? It sounds.
Oh, it is now the next song.
Yeah, that's really funny.
It is.
No, although I kind of like the idea of my mornings with music and talking to you. It's great.
All right.
Yeah, I think about, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, we've got a good chunk of responses. So the DX marketing team, lovely folks, are going to be combing through them and organizing a Miro board. So that will be ready for us in just like a couple minutes. So we can keep talking a little bit and then we'll switch over to looking at your answers and who here is having the same experiences, even though you might be at wildly, wildly different companies.
Yeah. The one thing that comes to mind too is just even how words like productivity, efficiency, I've noticed that there's a sort of general sort of, there's LinkedIn world, which is just debating these words back and forth over and over. But what I like to do is just watch and observe how people respond to those particular words, like in work settings. Probably not very scientific way to think about it, but I just observe how people think about that. And it is just amazing, even to that, the difference between efficacy and scalability and efficiency and productivity, just as you're talking about it with the team, can spark many, many different emotions. And so I think that that's one observation related to the word stuff that we're getting. There we go. Despair is toxic to an org. Paralysis is depressing. Oh, geez. Oh, James, it's heavy for this time of the morning to do these things.
Yeah. I guess for you, John, it's like early morning, but for me, this is the end of my
Yeah.
day where I've had where I've had all day to think about this.
Yeah.
Um,
Curious, Laura, when you're thinking about, as we're getting those things together, is you do a lot of one-on-one coaching with leaders and managers and other folks. I do some of that, but I'm also doing a lot of activities, sort of casting the net to lots of people in organizations. And I'm curious, like there's folks on the call who probably benefit from that level of close. What is the advice and the mental model you use when you're doing one-on-one coaching with folks around this versus maybe it's easy for me to, write these huge articles and lots of people read them, but I'm not sitting there doing the one-on-one consulting and coaching necessarily.
yeah, it's such an interesting question because I do run into this problem quite a lot with the leaders that I coach. So whether they're like a line manager, or more frequently when they're VP or CTO and they're in charge of, hundreds of developers or dozens, and they're responsible for the vision. And I think there's a gap. And I think this is where actually dissonance can come in here. And for those of you who aren't native English speakers or just don't know the word, dissonance is the word to describe when your system doesn't act the way that you expect it to act. And so there's lots of examples of this, like in everyday life. But if in a professional context, like I experience dissonance when, I work for a company that says like we're committed to diversity and inclusion, and then like the last hires are all the same, like exactly the same type of person, for example. It's like what the organization is saying happens isn't actually what's happening. And I think like the where I see leaders get stuck here is like they deeply want to, be using tools that are, cutting edge, whatever that means, or like modern tools. They want to be providing a very great developer experience. And they say these things, but like people still don't act in that way. It's like I'm spending so much time on advocacy, but I'm not actually seeing the results. And I think that's where most leaders get stuck. And that's where the answer to my previous question about like advocacy alone doesn't get us there. We need to actually go to where the decisions are being made and empower individuals who make decisions to make decisions with better resources, better tools, more autonomy. And that's where change can start to happen. You can't forget about the organizational vision and being really clear about what you expect as an organization. But it can't stop there. It has to go deeper. And I feel like that's where a lot of leaders get stuck when talking about things like, I want to reduce waste, I want to increase productivity or increase developer experience.
Yeah, one thing related to that, I think, when I do coach leaders on this as well, is I've noticed, at least in engineering too, people often feel they might let the rigor of the conversation or fear of overstepping their statements on efficacy, for example, make them be more conservative about pitching this. So I come from a product background, and sometimes I tell these folks in engineering leaders, you have to take a bigger hit, a bigger punch here. So an example of that would be, someone says, I think this could make our developers 5% more productive. And, they frame it just as this sort of percentage of productivity. And meanwhile, what I will ask them to do at that particular point is I will say, no, who is going to, who will be able to move twice as fast or 4 times as fast
Hmm.
because of this? And then they'll say, well, that's, oh, no one will believe me if I say that. I don't think that I know in my heart that that's true, but I want to be very conservative with this particular statement. And so when you're in a product background, you know, there is a bit of bravado and pitch that goes along with some of these. And so I think that if you're feeling, if you have an intuitive sense that you could get those types of improvements, you have to be willing, I think, to step out of that comfort zone of making these very, very conservative claims and really like trust your gut and intuition sometimes on these things. I think this is where the measurement problem sometimes creeps up, is that people are like, well, I just don't think we can measure it. And I just always say that, the powerful ideas imperfectly measured are more important than the perfect measures for not very powerful ideas. So if you have a powerful idea that you could really increase throughput and create much more value for your company if you're working more effectively, I think it helps to go there. That's
Hmm.
just what I would want to add to that.
Totally. Totally. So we've got, thank you,
Oh
Gianna
yeah.
from DX for pulling
Wow.
together this board. And I just dropped the link in Miro. So if you are not in listening mode and are in participation mode, if you're able to do that, you can jump on the Miro board and just take a look at the answers here. So
Nice. This is so
starting
good.
off with, where do you see a lot of drag or friction when trying to get things done? We have like, quite a lot of shared experiences here. Um, Decision making seems to be hot topic here. Decision making process across teams. Planning. We've got some things about poorly moderated meetings.
Yeah. I would like you to also note, anyone who's watching here, about like, look at the salience that some people mention, these Teflon shoulders across large Teflon shoulders. What? Okay, I can guess what that means, but that's pretty interesting. So some of these are very, very salient and
Mm-hmm.
cringy, and then other ones are very, very theoretical, which is also what we found when Laura and I did this activity. That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So decision making here. And then let's see, how did you feel when this happens? Uh Frustrated,
Yeah,
like very
there we go.
frustrated. Um Paralyzed, slowed, powerless,
Yeah.
man, annoyed,
One
rushed.
one thing here, as you read these, also think about that desensitization, right? How did you feel the first time it happened versus how do you feel in subsequent times? So that's interesting.
Yeah. I think also the reflection here in this, like, what are the contributing factors, is quite interesting. Um, like I think company culture is definitely a part of it, but I'm happy to see a lot, other answers that are going sideways or adjacent to company culture. Talking about, well, we're moving too fast, we're too distributed, we don't have empowered decision makers, for example.
Hmm. Yeah, very
So,
interesting.
so John, maybe I think the poor decision making seems to be like a big
Yeah.
uh
Yeah. And you all
one
are
with the
getting so
critical
much great.
mass.
I love to see all the cluster. Hopefully this is just effective. You can refer to this later on in the day. Yeah, maybe we could take one of these. One thing, maybe I think with it, we can sort of impersonate some of these after reading it. If you want to jump up to one of the things, we could show you 2 templates.
Yeah.
And I've just been reading too. I'm also opening this up and reading it as we're working. Here's 2 potential ways that we've found to be effective, or I've found to be effective, and I think they sort of reflect Laura's belief on these.
Yeah.
And one is what I would say is the situation opportunity frame. And the other one is starting right in on the opportunity frame. So let's do 2
Hmm.
examples. If you want to do this, the sticky notes while we're doing it, we can sort of impersonate this. If you go over to situation,
Totally.
Laura, and then, oh yeah, we can use one of these. So what
Yeah,
we
I
found
have
here,
two
so let's
freshmen
just,
here.
yeah, great. So so what are we feeling? Yeah, so we're feeling this level of frustration. Um, I think also in the case of some decision making things, people are feeling rushed and antagonized and annoyed. Great. And so an example here would be the trigger or situation would be where someone walks in one day and has already made a decision and they just drop it on the team and people feel a little bit, that's going back to feelings, you notice people feel a little helpless. They feel like they would be obstructionist if they jumped in at that point to call it out. So the triggering situation is, last week someone marched in and then dropped these decisions down on the team. We weren't necessarily a part of those decisions. The feelings and frustrations that feel frustrating, annoyed, it might have been a little bit helpless. Great. What you notice at that point, which is very, very important, is you have to tap into your own explanatory narratives right away to almost get that out of your system. So Laura, do you want to, like, when this happens and you're coaching a leader, what are some of the like edgier what are the type of narratives that they would give at this point?
Here is a skill from my coaching that I'll teach to all of you right now, which is like follow the pressure. And sometimes it's called follow the money. And so what you need to do is figure out like that leader who just came in and like dropped that decision on you. Why did they do that? Like
Yeah,
what was the reason behind it? And like who's putting pressure on them? And so
right,
oftentimes I can see it's like an engineering manager comes and drops that on the team. Or it's often perceived like, oh, a product manager comes and like drops these requirements on my team without discussing us or whatever.
right.
And usually it's like, okay, well, who's putting pressure on them?
Yeah.
And so we can imagine that like VP, whoever,
Yeah.
is unsatisfied with progress on X, called management meeting asking for like uh progress on X to
Right.
increase quickly, and they defined the way to get there.
Right.
So like wholly
Now,
undemocratic,
yeah.
uh
And the funny, the
executive driven
pressure that was
development.
under. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I always challenge you though, give a very generous explanatory narrative. X and Y were in the hall and
Yeah.
had an opportunity to talk for the first time in one quarter. And they took that opportunity to make that decision in order to help the team. So a lot
Yeah.
of times when you see PMs come in and they've decided this in their mental model, in their mental model for how this happens, they're doing the team a favor by making this decision. I've made this decision to make your life easier. Now, whether
Hmm.
that's the case or not, I always challenge people to have like a generous explanatory narrative too, to just challenge themselves how to think about it. Okay, so
Yeah.
first order consequences. You know, team rushed into the initiative, maybe. So the team rushed in. What's another? So with first order consequences, what I challenge you to think about is, don't try to stretch this all the way to the end of the company or these big existential problems. Just focus on the first order consequences of this particular trigger and situation.
Hmm.
So maybe they rushed into it.
Yeah.
And second, you want to take a stab at the second order consequences, Laura?
Ugh, there's so many here, right?
Yeah.
Um, so we have a team rush into initiative. They're not invested. They don't understand the problem scope. We
Yeah.
fast forward 6 months and, um, they're now maintaining a piece of
Yeah.
software where they did not understand the problem scope, and it hinders all future development because now we have to work around this like
Yeah.
broken piece because of this rush decision.
I love that, because if you look at your company, some of the most consequential things in your company were literally decided in 5 minutes in a hallway.
Yeah.
And yeah. So now they're having to maintain, they're working around this broken thing that was rushed. None of the, let's say you're going to lose employees, this is what
Yeah.
puts, Leah over the edge. She's finally like, I don't have any agency in this environment. I want to go somewhere where I'm more involved in the decisions. And you can do this. This is a really good exercise for structuring your description of this, especially even for executives. I felt this way when this happened, and a
Hmm.
couple possible narratives, I'm not sure, test my understanding, or this, and this. What I observed in the first order consequences is that it caused this. And although these are, a lot further out in the future, let's work around these things. So what new habits or behaviors might we want to introduce? Maybe one or two of them.
Yeah. I mean, I think the obvious one here is like, I don't know. I don't want to suggest like democratic decision making because I don't think that's a necessarily a healthy practice. But maybe it's a like, um, maybe there's more context or better change management
Yep.
skills from EM, PM, or whoever that was. Let me
Yeah.
make this a little bigger here.
Couple that I could think of here is limit your DIP, decision making in decisions in progress. So you could
Yeah.
actually visualize the big decisions that you need to make. You could do your big decisions once a month that have to involve a lot of people, be very deliberate
Mm-hmm.
about it. A new habit might be just more closer pairing between your leads and the PM, so they're not all so scattered. You could think about those things.
Yeah.
And one thing here is that what we were finding when Laura and I were talking about this is by talking about the habits and behaviors as very share as why as much as possible. That's it. Yeah, you could do those. I'll give you a really funny one from a person I was coaching recently is their team limited the um, can we questions. So like the PM could only
Mm,
do can we's on Fridays. So you would only discuss like, can we do future things on Fridays? So it was limiting decisions. By doing this before jumping to the beliefs and mindset, in many cases, I believe, depending on the audience, you should not mention mindset and beliefs, especially if it's super triggering to the people that you're listening to. But for you, you might want to consider what are these underlying beliefs. So one underlying belief here might be the belief that everyone can contribute to making great
mhm.
decisions. It's a huge belief,
Yeah.
underpinning that. And frankly, your company might have a very strong belief around individual decision making. This is perfectly in line with their beliefs, but you have a different belief. What are some thoughts that either limiting beliefs or sort of encouraging beliefs you've seen in this case, Laura?
Yeah, I think one thing I would call it is like especially if you're an executive or a manager of managers, like understanding that the team is the expert in their domain and like whatever decision that you can make, you might have to make a strategic decision, but you also have to follow that then into what does the team have to do? And do I actually have, did I get enough input from them? I think
Yeah,
like no surprises is maybe like an underlying mindset. On the other hand, though, I think I've seen organizations get too wound up in like socializing every single decision where
yeah,
no one can make a decision because we're just trying to like have a consensus with everyone. So it's so unique to your individual
right.
organization's footprint and like the constellation of your team and like how you're working. It's hard to sort of blanket statement here, but I think that
Yeah.
team is expert in their domain is just
Yeah. You
one
have to be
thing.
sensitive to the culture in your company at this point. Like if you walk into a meeting and say it's the agile mindset or it's the like nothing can be I spoke to someone recently over LinkedIn who said the degree to which she had been gaslit over the years by growth mindset. And so you got to be
Yeah.
really careful when you're talking about underlying beliefs and mindset. But I think that it's important for you to consider the own. If you want to jump to the other template, I can just I know we're going to run short on time,
Yeah.
but the other template, if we were to rephrase it in this way, I
Mm-hmm.
could take a quick stab. So we have an opportunity to improve decision quality and velocity. If we can reduce the time we spend on prematurely making decisions without everyone in the room and increase the amount of time and energy we spend on getting the right people in the room to make the decisions that matter. So that's one example. If you picked the
Mm-hmm.
A approach, if we can improve how we involve the right people at the right time in decision making, that could be a different approach. Create a new habit and behavior you could draw. We need to create a
Mm-hmm.
habit around, um, you know, inclusive decision making when it really matters, when we'll benefit from that diversity of
Mm-hmm.
perspectives, and then shift our underlying beliefs and mindset around who makes decisions and how they make
Yeah.
decisions. And then by running an experiment involving for the next quarter, we're going to batch big decisions to Fridays, and we're going to do a decision jam, and we're just going to get good at making decisions together. And Liam will prepare the decisions and queue them up and write that up into a doc 3 days before the meeting so that everyone has time to review it beforehand,
Yeah.
etc. Yeah. So anyway, going through one quickly, if this might be an easier way to think about framing it in your company, you could go with something like that.
Totally. Um, I love, David, your point about coaching and like some of these things are just this is hard. I think this is I get a little I guess it's a bit of a cringe for me when I hear people talk about things like this as soft skills, implying that they're not hard, because I actually think this is super hard. There's one habit that I have on teams that I lead that I'll share with you all now if you want to borrow it, is that whenever there is a meeting about something, make it super clear to the attendees if it is a decision meeting or if it's a discussion meeting, because they're really different. And if someone shows up to a discussion meeting expecting a decision, they're going to be disappointed. And if someone shows up the other way around, they're going to be taken off guard. I always try to make a practice as well as documenting everything ahead of time and sharing out a document and doing everything as possible async, and then leaving that batch decision for at the very end and calling out that it's a decision-making meeting. So that could be a habit to increase the decision-making quality on your teams as well.
Yep. One also point here I've been learning a lot recently is find the people in your company who are doing this well and let them be the spokesperson for the experiment. So in most companies, you sort of feel like you have to restart everyone and get everyone on this thing. And this goes with a lot of productivity and efficiency and other things, is if you can find an example of a team that does this reasonably well. I've recently been co-presenting with a coworker on a certain topic. I guarantee that presentation goes 5 times better that I'm co-presenting with the person that I present when I do those things. So whenever, just as a general idea on how to get this stuff working, you might want to find out who's doing it already well in your company.
Yeah. Wonderful. All right, we are just about at the very last
Too
minute here.
short, too
So
short. We should do
too
this for
short. We
2
could really
hours.
talk
Yeah.
about this for, I think 2 hours would be like a great workshop here. This Miro board is open and public. So if you wanted to copy and paste these templates and use them on your own, please feel free to do that. Peruse through other people's responses to that form and know that you're not alone. There's lots of people experiencing
Yeah.
lots of the same things. It's unfortunately it's not unique. Like, you're not special. That sounds a bit harsh, but companies have these problems. And yeah, we'll send out this recording along with a short list of resources, some of the articles that were mentioned in the chat today. So
Perfect.
thank you all very much for spending the time, and actually your teams,
Look
thank
out
you.
for
It's
our
great.
deck. Yeah, we'll follow up with
Yeah,
a survey, fill it out. Like we do want to do this card deck.
that is
And
true.
help us out with when it would be helpful or not, so we don't cringe out any leaders in your company unnecessarily or whatever. So there we go.
Totally. Wonderful. All right.
Thanks a lot.
Enjoy your day.
All right.
Thanks a lot, everyone. Take
Okay,
care.
bye.